Now, international relations expert Professor Seyed Marandi is an Iranian academic, a political analyst, and an expert on American studies and post-colonial literature. And he joins us now. A very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, President Trump says Iran did do it. It launched the attacks on those two oil tankers. But then Iran says, no, that's ridiculous. That's a dangerous accusation, or rather allegation. So what do you make of these tit-for-tat accusations and counter-accusations?
Well, there's one very important point that your report didn't include, and that is that the Japanese company that owns one of the tankers stated that the American narrative is false. And they said that the projectiles that hit the tanker came from the air, and that, as we see in the pictures, the holes are well above the water, and mines are placed underwater. So that could not have been a mine. And but this is something that you're not going to see in the Western media or the mainstream media. And then other media outlets across the world use Western media outlets as their sources, but they're always going to get the same mainstream perspective unless they do some extra searching. The reality on the ground is that a month ago, there was an attack on a number of ships off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, and that was the Fujairah port. Right before the attack, the U.S. National Security Council, the advisor, U.S. National Security Advisor Bolton, stated that he received information from the Israelis that Iran was about to carry out an attack, and how convenient that was, because an attack took place the next day. Now, in this attack, we had two ships that were taking cargo to Japan, and one of them was owned by Japan, hit 1 hour before the Japanese Prime Minister was supposed to meet the Iranian leader. It's been 41 years since a Japanese Prime Minister has visited Iran. And once he does visit Iran, as he is getting ready to visit the Iranian leader, these attacks take place, very close to the Iranian coast. And as I said, the Japanese company rejects the US narrative, but we do not see that in mainstream media. So the conclusion that most Iranians take from this is that this is probably a false flag operation that was carried out by those countries that are seeking war. The United Arab Emirates, led by the dictator Mohammed bin Zayed, it's a family regime like Saudi Arabia, and Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. These three people want war alongside Bolton and Pompeo, especially Bolton. So the Iranians believe that these countries, these people, either together or one or two of them or one of them, was probably behind the attack, because it does not make sense for Iranians to attack Japanese targets when the Japanese Prime Minister is in Iran.
I mean, it's quite interesting because European leaders are now asking Trump for hard evidence of this supposed attack on those oil tankers. I mean, I get the feeling that they're trying to avoid a situation wherein, leading to, the events leading into the Iraqi war in 2003 as a result of dodgy or compromised U.S. intelligence. I also have the same view that they are treading very careful this time not to support the U.S. administration when it comes to launching a war on Iran?
Well, in 2003, it was not dodgy intelligence. It was fabricated intelligence. And for those of us who remember the then U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell, give a speech at the UN Security Council, he lied from beginning to end in order to provide fabricated proof to justify a U.S. attack on Iraq. And this is what the United States is doing again today. A couple of years ago, if you recall, Nikki Haley, who was the U.S. representative to the UN, gave a talk with a missile behind her, which she claimed was an Iranian missile given to the Yemeni resistance against the Saudi aggression. There was no evidence. She just put it behind her stated to make it seem as if it was evidence. Just like the clip that the US Navy put out, which doesn't show anything and doesn't prove anything, but all the Western mainstream media outlets have been repeating it, and you're showing it as we speak as well. It shows nothing, it means nothing, but it gives an image that the Trump narrative, the Western narrative, is the valid narrative. And the Europeans, although they are questioning Trump, at the end of the day, the Iranians know quite well that the Europeans will fall in line no matter what Trump wants. So Iran knows that the only way that it can protect its sovereignty in itself is through relying on its own capabilities and capabilities of non-Western countries that are also being threatened by the United States. Remember, just recently, the current Secretary of State of the United States, Pompeo, who has been condemning Iran left, right, and center, he gave a speech and he said that when he was the head of the CIA, because he was the head of the CIA a couple of years ago, he said, we lied, we cheated, and we stole. And he said that while laughing. If someone follows my Twitter account, you can watch the clip. So this is the Secretary of State who admits that the United States is utterly dishonest. He is utterly dishonest, completely unreliable, yet the Western media, despite their dislike for Trump, when the United States puts out a clip, they all get the memo.
I mean, I'm reading into the fact that European countries are no fans of Iran because of its policies, especially in the Middle East. And now the superpowers have joined in the fray. Germany is demanding an investigation into this. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, is supporting the United States on its stance that Iran did actually do it. And China is backing Iran. How likely is an escalation of the impasse?
Well, yes, the European countries don't like Iran's policy in the region because they support apartheid in Palestine and they support the Saudi aggression against Yemen, and they've been supporting the Saudi starvation of Yemen. They've been giving Saudi Arabia weapons for years to massacre the people of Yemen. They've destroyed Libya. And the list goes on. They destroyed Syria by allowing extremists to enter the country and supporting those extremists for years. So yes, obviously the Europeans are like that. Just like when Iran was supporting your resistance movement in South Africa, when we were supporting the resistance to apartheid, the Europeans were supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa. So again, as I said, the Iranians are not counting on the Germans or the French or the British to suddenly become enlightened and to see the light. The Iranians are counting on their own competent defense capabilities in order to retain their sovereignty, and they are also working in cooperation with other countries that are being antagonized by the United States, such as Russia, such as China, among others, such as Turkey, in order to counter the pressure of Trump and the likes of Trump.
Now, this is clearly the United States bullying tactics, to coerce Iran to agree to its policies when it comes to the nuclear deal. Just how likely would that happen? How likely would Iran accede or even give in to the United States demands, looking at the level of support that Iran is getting from the international community, particularly the superpowers?
Well, Iran is not going to shift its policy because Iran has already signed a nuclear agreement, and that nuclear agreement was signed after a decade of negotiations. Iran gave concessions and was flexible in order to reach that agreement. Many in Iran were opposed to the agreement, but when the Iranians decided to sign up to it, the whole of the country basically was united in saying we must abide by our commitments. And till this day, Iran is the only side in the nuclear deal that is abiding by its commitments. The Europeans and the Americans are in full violation of the nuclear deal. Yet for over a year, Iran has been the only side that continues to abide by its commitments. So I think that the international community, Western countries aside, because they live in their own Eurocentric world where they see themselves as above and beyond the rest of the world. They consider themselves to be the international community because they see themselves as exceptional. Europeans aside and the Americans aside, the international community recognizes that the United States is being aggressive. The United States has exited the deal. So Iran has done nothing wrong, even though there has never been any evidence at all that Iran has at any point been attempting to produce a nuclear weapon, ever. But despite that, in order to decrease tensions, in order to bring about a more stable situation in the region, the Iranians signed up to the nuclear deal and they are abiding by it. Now, the Iranians are saying we cannot negotiate with the Americans until they come back to the nuclear deal, until they come back to their commitments. How can Iran negotiate with the United States when the United States is not abiding by its current commitments? The United States had a commitment. So if the United States violates those commitments and Iran decides to negotiate with Americans, that is appeasement. And that will only encourage the United States to break further commitments. And hypothetically, if Iran does negotiate with the United States, anytime that the United States feels that Iran is not doing what it wants at the negotiating table, they will implement sanctions again. So it's useless. The only way forward is for the United States to recognize that it cannot behave like a rogue regime, that it must abide by its commitments, that it must end this brutal war against ordinary Iranians, this economic terrorism that it's carrying out against Iranians, which has killed innocent people, because the Americans are even attempting to prevent Iran from importing medicine. And unfortunately, many countries are in fear of the United States. Your own country, despite the fact that they have good relations with Iran, and despite the fact that Iran supported the resistance against the apartheid regime, was one of the first countries to halt the import of oil under pressure from the United States. But there are countries such as China which recognize that a weak Iran is a threat to China, especially since China is now under economic a trade war. It's feeling the pain of a trade war with the United States, the Russians too, and other countries. And Iran is also selling oil in the high seas at a discounted price of $3 to $4 a barrel, which doesn't really hurt Iran much because the production of oil in Iran is not expensive. So it is a difficult time for Iran, but Iran really has no option. If the Iranians accept appeasing the United States, then that will be the beginning of more and more pressure from the United States. And as we've seen, the Europeans, they say nice things, but at the end of the day, they obey Trump.
Indeed, it is a difficult time, not only for Iran, but as well as the United States. And Professor, what is also worrisome is the fact that Iran might misjudge President Trump's unwillingness to go to war. But then thank you so much for your time. That was Professor Seyed Marandi, an international relations expert, joining us.